want to tell you a story that happened to me 7 years ago. My name is Christiana, and I want to tell you something that happened to me that's about standing up to workplace bullying, corporate nepotism, and how sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to risk everything you've worked for. This is about the time a spoiled CEO's son tried to destroy my career simply because I refused to take orders from an unqualified teenager, and how careful documentation and strategic alliances ultimately led to justice. 7 years ago, I was working as a senior operations manager at a mid-sized company that had been struggling financially until we landed some major international contracts. I had spent 6 years building the international division from scratch, working countless late nights and weekends to establish relationships with clients who literally saved the company from bankruptcy. I was proud of what I'd accomplished and genuinely believed that hard work and competence mattered more than politics or connections. That belief was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. The trouble began when our CEO, Richard Carter, announced that his 19-year-old son, Nathaniel, would be joining the company to gain experience. Most of us assumed this meant he'd shadow a few departments for a couple of weeks before getting bored and disappearing back to whatever luxury resort he'd emerged from. We couldn't have been more wrong. Instead of starting at the bottom like any normal intern, Nathaniel was immediately handed the title of Junior Operations Director, a position that should have required years of experience and deep understanding of our complex operations. This was the same title I had earned after 5 grueling years of proving myself. Yet here was this kid who had never worked an honest day in his life, suddenly positioned as my supposed superior. From day one, Nathaniel carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him obedience simply because of his last name. He would strut around the office in expensive suits that hung awkwardly on his lanky frame, barking orders at people who had decades more experience than him. His understanding of our business was superficial at best, yet he acted as though he'd invented the industry himself. Initially, I tried to make the best of an impossible situation. I quietly corrected his mistakes before they reached clients. I rewrote his disastrous proposals to save face with our business partners. When he missed critical deadlines, I covered for him. I told myself I was protecting the company and that eventually he would mature and learn. I was protecting my own career too. I needed this job, and I genuinely cared about the company's success. But Nathaniel's behavior only grew worse. He began treating seasoned employees like servants, demanding they drop everything to handle his personal requests. He would interrupt important meetings to share half-baked ideas. That showed he hadn't even bothered to read the briefing materials. Most concerning of all, he started making decisions that could have serious legal and financial consequences, apparently believing that his family name made him untouchable. The breaking point came about 2 weeks before what I now think of as the morning that changed everything. Nathaniel barged into my office and tossed a file onto my desk with casual arrogance. "Fire the Johnson team," he said, as if he was asking me to order lunch. They annoyed me. I stared at him in disbelief. The Johnson team, my team, had just secured a $3.5 million contract for the company. They were talented, hard-working professionals who had gone above and beyond to land this deal. The idea of firing them because they had somehow annoyed this entitled teenager was beyond absurd. "I'm not firing anyone because they annoyed you," I replied, keeping my voice calm and professional despite the rage building inside. His response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "I'll tell my father you refused a direct order." I looked him straight in the eye without flinching. "Go ahead." He stormed out of my office, and I genuinely hoped that would be the end of it. I assumed Richard would knock some sense into his son, or at least explain to him how the real world works. I had severely underestimated how far entitlement and family loyalty could corrupt good judgment. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally arrived on a Thursday morning in April. I was in my office early, as always, organizing quarterly reports and preparing for another busy day. That's when my door slammed open and Nathaniel marched in, his eyes blazing with the kind of fury only a spoiled child can muster when someone dares to tell them no. "You think you can ignore me?" he barked, slamming his fist down on my desk card. Enough to make my coffee cup jump. "When I give an order, you follow it." I remained seated, maintaining my composure even as my heart raced. "Nathaniel, I don't take orders from interns." His face turned red with indignation. I'm the future CEO. Then I'll deal with you when you're actually the CEO, I replied evenly. Until then, I gestured politely toward the door. Please leave. My office. I knew that brushing him off like that would come back to haunt me. What I didn't expect was how quickly and dramatically the retaliation would begin. That very evening was our company's annual spring gala, an elegant affair where we entertained investors and celebrated our successes. I was there representing our international clients. Division 1 had built from nothing over 6 years of dedicated work. The venue was beautiful. The investors were pleased with our progress. And for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that hard work and competence still counted for something in the corporate world, and my phone buzzed with a text that made my stomach drop. Claire, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Richard Carter. I barely slept that night. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing in front of Richard's desk, watching as he avoided eye contact and fumbled with papers on his desk. The coward couldn't even look at me as he prepared to deliver what I knew would be devastating news. Claire, I'm afraid. I have to, he began, but I cut him off. Check your inbox first, I said calmly. His face went completely pale as he realized what I was implying. Because what Richard didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. I had been documenting everything. While Nathaniel and his father had been plotting my downfall, I had been quietly building a comprehensive record of every inappropriate action, every reckless decision, and every attempt to abuse power. I'd forwarded Richard a folder containing 43 emails, each one a damning piece of evidence of his son's misconduct. There were emails where Nathaniel ordered departments to falsify delivery reports to hide his mistakes. Messages demanding that the finance team adjust numbers to make his forecasts look more accurate. Direct communications to me with threats like, just do what I say or I'll make sure you're out. Some were laughably incompetent, others were borderline illegal, but all of them painted a clear picture of a dangerous pattern of behavior. I stood silently as Richard clicked through the evidence, watching the color drain from his face as he realized the full scope of what his precious son had been doing. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. I had no idea, he whispered. Didn't you? I replied, folding my arms. Because the truth was, he had known at least parts of it. But turning a blind eye is always easier when it's your own golden boy causing the problems. Richard buried his head in his hands. Claire, why didn't you come to me sooner? Because I thought this company believed in merit, I said, keeping my voice level. And because I didn't want to be the reason your family imploded. He looked up at me with eyes that showed a mixture of guilt and fear. My board can never see this. I'm not here to threaten you, Richard, I replied firmly. I'm here because your son walked into my office yesterday morning and demanded I fire a team that just saved you $3.5 million. When I refused, he promised to destroy my career. I paused to let that sink in. I came here because I won't let a 19-year-old brat treat people like garbage while you look the other way. After a long moment of silence, Richard whispered, What do you want? I smiled slightly. I want my career. I want the Johnson team protected. I want this nonsense to stop before it blows up in your face. As for Nathaniel, that's your problem to solve. I left Richard's office that morning with my heart pounding, but not from fear. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice and ensuring that hard work still mattered. But by Monday morning, I realized that Nathaniel wasn't going. To let this go quietly, the corporate sabotage began almost immediately. I was suddenly left off email chains for projects I was leading. Meetings were rescheduled without notification. Budget approvals that should have been routine were mysteriously delayed. It was the subtle art of professional assassination, and Nathaniel was clearly enjoying every moment of it. I even caught him smirking at me outside a strategy meeting I'd been excluded from. He actually had the audacity to wink. A week later, Richard called me back into his office. You're right, he said quietly. Nathaniel's out of control. Good, I replied. So you've spoken with him? Richard looked away uncomfortably. I tried. He won't listen. He told me that if I don't get rid of you, he'll go to the board and cause trouble. I actually laughed out loud. 19 years old and threatening board action. Impressive. Richard didn't find it amusing. Claire, I'm afraid I have to suspend you temporarily just to calm him down. It's not personal. I stared at him with complete disgust. It's never personal, is it? But I wasn't defeated because Richard had no idea what I'd been preparing for this exact scenario. What Nathaniel and his father didn't realize was that I hadn't been standing alone through any of this. While they were busy plotting my exit, I'd been building something much more powerful, a coalition of truth. 3 months before Nathaniel's final tantrum in my office, I had noticed concerning shifts in the company dynamics. Clients were expressing nervousness about recent interactions. Senior managers were asking strange questions about processes that had been working smoothly for years. It didn't take a genius to realize that Nathaniel was positioning himself to take control of the international division I had built from scratch. And Richard was allowing it to happen, so I did the one thing they never expected. I started building an ironclad case. I reached out to 2 people I trusted more than anyone else in the company. Marta Chen, our head of compliance, and David Alvarez, our senior legal counsel. Both had worked alongside me for years, and both had quietly expressed concerns about Nathaniel's increasingly erratic behavior. Over coffee, away from the office, I laid out everything I had discovered. At first, Marta shook her head in dismay. "Claire, this is a career-ending mess," David agreed. "If the board sees this ... They need to see this," I interrupted, meeting their eyes steadily. "Not for me, for the company." After a long pause, Marta leaned forward. "I'm with you." David nodded grimly. "Me too." That's when the real work began. We spent countless late nights cross-referencing contracts that Nathaniel had interfered with. We tracked compliance violations that could have triggered federal investigations. David drafted confidential memos outlining potential breaches of fiduciary duty and identifying who could be held legally responsible. Most shocking of all, Marta discovered that one of Nathaniel's pet projects had nearly put us in violation of international trade laws. If I hadn't intervened quietly 2 months earlier, the fallout could have destroyed the company entirely. But there was one final piece of the puzzle that would prove decisive: our largest international client, Eastbridge Global Holdings. I had built that relationship personally over several years, and I knew they had serious concerns about Nathaniel after a disastrous meeting he had led without my oversight. I reached out to Michelle Tan, their head of partnerships, and invited her to lunch. Nothing pressured, no hidden agenda, just a casual conversation between professionals. But when I casually asked about their plans for future contracts, Michelle gave me a knowing look. "Claire, off the record, if you're gone, so are we." I blinked in surprise. "Seriously?" She nodded firmly. "We don't work with companies run by amateurs." By the time my suspension hit the internal email system, 2 things happened simultaneously that would change everything. Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board of directors, and Eastbridge Global sent a formal letter of concern to Richard Carter with a not-so-subtle warning about withdrawing their business if appropriate. Leadership changes weren't made immediately. The official notice hit the company-wide email at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Claire Patterson, administrative leave, pending internal review. No explanation, no details, just a cold, sterile sentence announcing that I was, for all practical purposes, out. But what Richard Carter didn't know was that the review had already started, and it wasn't focused on me. At 10:05 a.m., Marta and David submitted their joint report directly to the board of directors. It wasn't dramatic or accusatory, just cold, hard facts presented in professional language. Nathaniel Carter had attempted to manipulate financial data on multiple occasions. He had issued directives outside his authority, risking serious contractual violations. He had interfered with compliance procedures that existed to protect the company from legal liability. And Richard Carter, through either willful ignorance or deliberately turning a blind eye, had allowed all of it to continue unchecked. By 11:30 a.m., the boardroom was in complete lockdown. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but Marta kept me updated via carefully worded text messages throughout the day. "Richard looks like he's aged 10 years in an hour. Nathaniel tried to blame you for everything. Didn't go well with the board. They're not buying any of his excuses. They want real answers." Around 2 p.m., Richard called me. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again 20 minutes later. By the 3rd call, I finally picked up. "Claire, I think we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "About my suspension?" I replied coolly. He exhaled sharply. About everything. We met in his office late that afternoon. For once, Nathaniel wasn't hovering in the background trying to control the narrative. Richard looked completely hollow. The confident CEO mask had cracked and fallen away, revealing the scared man underneath. "The board wants to meet with you tomorrow morning," he said quietly. I nodded without showing any emotion. And ... He hesitated, clearly struggling to get the words out. "They've asked for Nathaniel's immediate resignation. They want me to step down temporarily pending a full review." I didn't flinch. Sounds appropriate. Richard gave me a bitter smile. "You really did it. You destroyed him." I met his gaze steadily. "I didn't destroy anyone, Richard. Nathaniel did that to himself. I just refused to help cover it up." The next morning, I walked into the boardroom for the first time in my career. 12 directors sat around a polished mahogany table, their faces serious and professional. But when I took my seat, something unexpected happened. They didn't grill me with hostile questions. They didn't treat me like a problem to be solved. Instead, they asked for my perspective on what had happened. I gave it to them professionally and calmly, backed with specific facts and examples. I explained the deals I had negotiated, the partnerships I had protected, and the serious risks that Nathaniel's reckless behavior had created for the company. I watched as heads nodded around the table, seeing recognition and respect in there. Eyes stopped. By the end of that meeting, the chairman leaned forward with an unexpected proposition. "Claire, we'd like you to consider stepping into an interim leadership role for the international division while we complete our restructuring process." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I wasn't just being reinstated, I was being promoted. 2 weeks after that board meeting, Nathaniel Carter was gone. No farewell email, no company announcement, no final meeting, just gone. I heard through office whispers that he'd been quietly shipped off to manage some family investment interests overseas. Richard Carter stepped down voluntarily around the same time, citing personal reasons and a desire to focus on family matters. On my first official day as interim director of international operations, I called my team together for a meeting. No fancy speeches, no victory laps, just one simple promise. I don't care about titles or last names around here. I care about good work, personal integrity, and mutual respect. That's how we're going to move forward together. For the first time in months, I saw genuine relief wash over their faces. A month later, Eastbridge Global renewed their contract with us, not because we begged them to stay, but because Michelle Tan called me personally to say, "We want to work with leaders who actually know what they're doing." That's you. Other clients followed their lead. New deals started closing again. The stability and professionalism returned, and the company didn't just recover from the chaos. It began thriving in ways it hadn't for years. Then came the final twist that I never saw coming. The board invited me to a private dinner at Anne, upscale restaurant downtown. Sitting across from people who had once viewed me as just another department head, I realized something fundamental had changed. They weren't looking at me as a temporary placeholder anymore. They were looking at me as a genuine leader. The chairman spoke first. "Claire, we'd like to offer you the permanent position of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately." I paused, letting the magnitude of that offer sink in completely. Then I said something that surprised even me. "I have conditions." He smiled approvingly. "Let's hear them." I laid out my terms clearly. 0 tolerance for nepotism in any leadership roles. Transparent accountability standards for all executives, regardless of their family connections. Full authority to build and protect my team according to professional standards, not political considerations. The chairman nodded after each condition. Agreed on all counts. I signed the contract a week later, not for the impressive title, not even for the substantial raise, but because I wanted to make absolutely sure that no one else would ever have to fight the same battles I'd fought. Just to be treated with basic professional dignity and respect. Looking back on that entire experience now, I realized something profound about the nature of real power. Nathaniel tried to destroy my career because I wouldn't follow his illegitimate orders. Richard tried to sacrifice me to protect his family's reputation. But neither of them understood a fundamental truth about leadership and authority. Real power doesn't come from titles on business cards or threats made in private offices. It comes from demonstrated competence, strength of character, and earning the trust of people who believe in your ability to lead them well. And that's something no spoiled heir and no cowardly CEO can ever fake, no matter how much money or family influence they think they can leverage. The corporate world is full of people who mistake position for power, but true leadership is earned through actions, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my career.